Michael awoke to the gentle hum of his alarm clock, the early morning light just beginning to seep through the curtains. He sat up, stretched, and took a moment to relish the tranquility of his room. The day was meticulously planned, as always. He slipped out of bed and headed to the kitchen, where he prepared his usual breakfast: scrambled eggs, toast, and a fresh pot of coffee. As he ate, Michael glanced around his spotless kitchen, taking satisfaction in the orderliness. Each item had its place, each surface was gleaming. He finished his meal, cleaned the dishes, and wiped down the counters, ensuring everything was just as it should be. Dressed in a neatly pressed shirt and trousers, Michael walked to his car, enjoying the crisp morning air. The drive to his office in the small town of Brooksville was uneventful. He liked it that way. The streets were familiar, the routines predictable. At the office, Michael was known for his efficiency. As a manager at a local manufacturing company, he handled his tasks with precision and diligence. His colleagues respected him, though he kept a distance. Small talk and social interactions were minimal, and he preferred it that way. Conversations were succinct and to the point. "Morning, Michael," said Sarah, his assistant, handing him a stack of reports. "Thank you, Sarah. I'll review these and get back to you by noon," he replied, offering a brief nod. The day progressed smoothly. Michael moved from one task to the next, checking off items from his meticulously maintained to-do list. As the workday drew to a close, Michael packed his briefcase and headed home. The evening unfolded much like the morning. He watered the plants in his small garden, ensuring each received just the right amount of water. Dinner was a simple affair, often a salad or a sandwich, which he ate alone at his spotless dining table. After dinner, he settled into his favorite armchair with a book. The hours slipped by quietly, the silence only occasionally broken by the turning of a page. Just as the clock approached midnight, Michael prepared for bed, setting his alarm for the next morning. But that night, as he lay in bed reading, a faint noise caught his attention. It was a soft, distant crying, almost imperceptible. He paused, listening intently. The sound seemed to be coming from outside, perhaps from one of the neighboring houses. Dismissing it as the wind or some other mundane noise, he returned to his book. In the following days, Michael's routine continued uninterrupted. Each morning, he woke early, ate breakfast, and went to work. Evenings were spent in quiet solitude, tending to his plants or reading. Yet the faint crying noise lingered in his mind. He heard it again on several occasions, always late at night, always just as he was about to drift off to sleep. One afternoon, as Michael returned home from work, he noticed his neighbor, Eric, checking his mail. It was the first time he had seen Eric in weeks. Eric was a reclusive figure, rarely seen outside his house. He was a man of few words and fewer interactions. "Hello, Eric," Michael called out, his voice polite but reserved. Eric glanced up briefly, offering a curt nod before retreating back into his house. Michael watched him go, curiosity piqued. Eric's house had always been an enigma, much like the man himself. That night the crying was louder, more insistent. Michael sat up in bed, straining to hear. It was unmistakable now, the sound of a child's sobs. He frowned, trying to make sense of it. Brooksville was a quiet town, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business. Michael lay in bed, the room enveloped in darkness except for the soft glow of his bedside lamp. The faint, muffled crying he had initially dismissed now seemed persistent, slicing through the night with a sorrowful regularity. Each night the sound grew clearer, more insistent. He strained to hear, holding his breath, his eyes darting toward the window that faced Eric's house. He turned on his side, trying to block out the noise. Minutes passed, then an hour. The crying continued, a haunting melody of distress that kept sleep at bay. Frustrated, he threw off the covers and stood up, pacing the length of his room. The hardwood floor creaked under his weight. His mind raced with questions. What could be happening next door? Why was a child crying in the middle of the night? Peering through the curtains, Michael's gaze fixed on Eric's house. The windows were dark, curtains drawn. Nothing out of the ordinary, yet the cries continued. He shook his head, returning to bed, trying once again to convince himself it was none of his business. But sleep was elusive, his thoughts tangled with concern and curiosity. The following morning, Michael felt the effects of his sleepless night. His movements were slower, his mind foggy. At work, he found it hard to concentrate. He fumbled with papers, misplacing files he had handled with ease for years. His colleagues noticed his distraction but said nothing, respecting his usual preference for minimal interaction. "Morning, Michael," Sarah greeted him, placing a fresh stack of reports on his desk. "Morning, Sarah." "Thank you," he replied, forcing a smile. He stared at the reports, the words blurring before his eyes. Throughout the day, his thoughts kept drifting back to the sounds from Eric's house. Should he do something? But what if he was wrong? The risk of overstepping and making false accusations weighed heavily on him. The internal struggle gnawed at his usually composed demeanor. That evening, Michael returned home with a sense of dread. He hoped for silence, but knew better. After dinner, he sat in his armchair, book in hand. But his attention was elsewhere. The quiet of his house was oppressive, each tick of the clock amplifying his unease. As night fell, the crying resumed. Michael found himself at the window again, watching Eric's house. The silhouette of Eric appeared, moving quickly from one room to another. Michael noted the frequency of his neighbor's departures, each time carrying large bags. The sight added to his growing unease. What could Eric be doing? One night, as Michael observed through his curtains, he saw Eric leaving in a hurry, a large duffel bag slung over his shoulder. The door remained slightly ajar. Michael's heart pounded. This was different. Should he investigate now? The urge to act battled with his fear of confrontation. What if Eric returned while he was snooping around? He stood frozen, the open door a silent invitation. He imagined the scenarios: confronting Eric, finding something he shouldn't, getting the police involved. His mind was a whirlwind of possibilities, none of them comforting. He decided against it, opting for caution. The risk seemed too great. Days turned into nights. The routine of unsettling sounds and sleepless nights continued. At work, Michael's distraction grew more apparent. He avoided eye contact, his answers short and clipped. Sarah gave him a concerned look, but refrained from asking questions. Michael lay in bed, the room dark and still, save for the soft, persistent crying that had now become a nightly occurrence. The sound was louder tonight, more desperate, piercing the silence with a sorrowful intensity that Michael could no longer ignore. He turned onto his side, clutching the pillow to his ear, but it was no use. The cries seemed to seep through the walls, embedding themselves in his thoughts. Sitting up, he glanced at the clock. It was past midnight. He swung his legs over the side of the bed and sat there for a moment, his mind a whirlpool of indecision. Should he call the police? What if it was nothing? What if it was something? The potential embarrassment of a false alarm battled with a gnawing concern for the child in distress. He stood and began to pace the length of his bedroom, each step matching the rhythm of the cries. Michael's thoughts drifted back to his own childhood. He remembered the loneliness, the nights spent yearning for a comforting voice, for someone to notice his silent suffering. The memory brought a lump to his throat. He couldn't shake the feeling that the child next door was enduring something far worse. Taking a deep breath, he made a decision. He couldn't ignore it any longer. The thought of doing nothing, of letting the cries continue unanswered, was unbearable. The connection he felt to the unseen child was too strong, too personal. It was as if he were hearing his own younger self calling out for help. Michael moved with a newfound sense of purpose. He set his alarm for early morning, knowing he needed to act before the neighborhood stirred to life. He then began to gather the items he would need. In the kitchen, he grabbed a flashlight from the drawer and tested it, the beam cutting through the darkness of the room. Satisfied, he set it aside and reached for a notepad and pen, thinking he might need to jot down any details or observations. His phone was already charging on the counter. He made a mental note to ensure it was fully charged before he left. In his bedroom, he opened the closet and pulled out dark clothing. He chose a black turtleneck and pants, hoping they would help him blend into the shadows. As he dressed, the cries outside continued, a constant reminder of why he was doing this. Each sob seemed to fuel his resolve. He took a moment to look around his bedroom, the familiar surroundings giving him a brief sense of comfort. The neatly made bed, the bookshelves lined with meticulously arranged volumes, the soft glow of the lamp on his nightstand. It all felt like a stark contrast to the turmoil he imagined next door. Sitting on the edge of the bed, Michael laced up his shoes, his fingers trembling slightly. He wasn't used to this kind of action, this kind of uncertainty. His life had always been about routine, about predictability. But tonight, that was changing. He was stepping into the unknown, driven by a need to help, to make a difference. He stood up and walked to the window, pulling back the curtain just enough to peer outside. Eric's house was dark, the front yard bathed in the pale light of the street lamp. Everything seemed still, but the cries continued, more muffled now, but still there. Michael felt a surge of anger. How could Eric let this happen? What kind of person ignored such suffering? Michael turned away from the window and took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing heart. He double-checked his preparations: flashlight, notepad, phone, dark clothing. He was as ready as he could be. The cries outside seemed to echo his determination, urging him on. He sat down at his desk and scribbled a quick note, explaining his actions in case something went wrong. He wasn't sure who would find it, but it felt like a necessary precaution. Folding the note, he left it on the desk, a silent testament to his intentions. With everything in place, Michael sat back on the edge of his bed, the weight of what he was about to do settling over him. He knew this was just the beginning, that the real challenge lay ahead. But for now, he felt a strange sense of calm. He had made his decision. He would act. The night was still, the air crisp and silent. Michael crept through his yard, the beam of his flashlight muted by his hand. He reached the fence, separating his property from Eric's. Heart pounding in his chest. The faint cries from the previous nights echoed in his mind, spurring him forward. He had to know what was happening inside that house. At the back of Eric's house, Michael found a window slightly ajar. He hesitated, casting a quick glance around to ensure he was alone. With a deep breath, he carefully pushed the window open, the hinges creaking softly. He peered inside, squinting to adjust to the dim light. The room was small and sparsely furnished. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, casting a sickly yellow glow. As his eyes adjusted, Michael's gaze fell on a figure huddled in the corner. It was a boy, frail and trembling, his hair matted and his clothes filthy. Michael's breath caught in his throat. The boy had red marks on his wrists, raw and chafed, telling a story of restraint and suffering. "Hey," Michael whispered, his voice barely audible. "Hey, kid." The boy looked up, his eyes wide with fear. He shrank back, pressing himself against the wall. "It's okay," Michael continued softly. "I'm not going to hurt you. My name is Michael. What's yours?" The boy hesitated, then whispered, "Lucas." "Lucas," Michael repeated, committing the name to memory. "Are you alone here?" Lucas nodded, tears welling up in his eyes. Michael felt a surge of anger and sorrow. No child should endure this. "Lucas, I'm going to help you," Michael said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I promise. But I need to go now and make a plan. I don't want to put you in more danger." Lucas's eyes filled with a mix of hope and fear. "You're coming back?" "Yes, I will come back," Michael assured him. "Just hold on a little longer, okay? Stay strong." Lucas nodded again, his small body trembling. Michael gave him one last reassuring look before retreating from the window. He closed it as quietly as he had opened it and made his way back to his house, his mind racing with the gravity of what he had seen. Once inside, Michael paced the living room, the image of Lucas etched in his mind. The boy's haunted eyes, his frail frame, the marks on his wrists. It was all too much. He felt a sickening mix of anger and helplessness. How could this be happening in his quiet neighborhood? He sat down at his desk, pulling out a notepad. He began to jot down everything he had seen, every detail that could help him later. The room's layout, Lucas's condition, the dim lighting, he needed to remember it all. As he wrote, a plan began to form in his mind. He couldn't rush into this. He had to be careful, methodical. The last thing he wanted was to alert Eric and put Lucas in even more danger. He would need to gather evidence, perhaps contact the authorities with concrete proof. Michael's resolve hardened. He couldn't ignore this, not now. He would find a way to save Lucas no matter the risk. The boy's safety depended on him, and he couldn't let him down. He glanced at the clock. It was late, but sleep was out of the question. He spent the rest of the night preparing, gathering supplies, and refining his plan. He checked his phone, ensuring it was fully charged. He set out dark clothing for the next night's mission. As dawn approached, Michael felt a grim determination settle over him. He would go back. He would rescue Lucas. But for now, he had to be patient, had to think carefully about his next steps. He couldn't afford any mistakes. The sun began to rise, casting a pale light over the neighborhood. Michael stood by his window, looking out at Eric's house. The facade was still, betraying none of the horrors inside. But Michael knew better now. He had seen the truth, and he couldn't unsee it. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for the days ahead. He would need all his wits, all his courage. But he was ready. For Lucas's sake, he had to be. With the plan in place, Michael allowed himself a brief moment of rest. He lay down, the image of Lucas's tear-filled eyes still vivid in his mind. He closed his eyes, determination blending with a sense of urgency. He would go back. He had to. Lucas was depending on him. Michael paced his living room, glancing occasionally at the clock. Eric would be leaving soon. He had to be ready. The memory of Lucas, huddled and frightened, fueled his determination. He couldn't let this go on any longer. When he saw Eric step out of his house, Michael took a deep breath and followed. He waited until Eric reached the end of his driveway, then called out, "Eric, can I talk to you for a moment?" Eric turned, his expression unreadable. "Michael, what do you need?" Michael approached, his heart pounding. "I've been hearing strange noises coming from your house, crying mostly. Is everything all right in there?" Eric's eyes narrowed. "Crying? I don't know what you're talking about. Maybe it's the plumbing. The old pipes make all kinds of noises." Michael shook his head. "No, it's not the pipes. I saw a boy in your house, Eric. His name is Lucas. He looks scared and hurt. What's going on? For a moment, Eric's facade faltered, but he quickly regained his composure. You must be mistaken, Michael. There's no boy in my house. Michael's jaw tightened. I saw him, Eric. He has red marks on his wrists, like he's been tied up. You can't deny it. Eric's face grew pale and he glanced around nervously. Look, it's not what you think. Lucas he's in trouble. I'm trying to help him. Help him? By keeping him locked up and terrified? Michael's voice rose, anger seeping through. He needs proper help, Eric. We need to call the authorities. Eric's eyes flashed with desperation. No, you don't understand. The system will only make things worse for him. I'm the only one who can take care of him. Michael stepped closer, his voice firm. What you're doing isn't helping. It's harming him. If you really care about Lucas, you'll let someone else step in, someone who can actually help. Eric's demeanor shifted from desperation to aggression. You don't know anything about this. Stay out of it, Michael. He pulled a knife from his pocket, the blade catching the light. I'm warning you. Don't come near my house again. Michael's heart raced, but he stood his ground. Threatening me isn't going to solve anything. You know this isn't right. Lucas deserves better. For a tense moment, they stood facing each other, the knife gleaming between them. Then Eric's shoulders slumped slightly, and he took a step back. Just leave, Michael. This isn't your business. Michael held his gaze, his voice unwavering. It is my business when a child's life is at stake. I won't back down. Eric stared at him, a mixture of anger and helplessness in his eyes. Finally, he turned and walked back to his house, the door slamming shut behind him. Michael exhaled, his body shaking from the adrenaline. He knew Eric was unstable, and the situation was more dangerous than ever. But he couldn't abandon Lucas. He returned to his house, mind racing with the next steps. He sat at his kitchen table, scribbling down everything that had happened. Eric's denial, the admission, the knife. He knew he had to act quickly, but carefully. Michael stood in his kitchen, the faint morning light casting long shadows across the room. His mind was set. He had to get Lucas out of Eric's house, and he had to do it tonight. He moved methodically, gathering supplies. He filled a small backpack with food, water, and a first aid kit, ensuring he had everything necessary for a swift escape. He also packed a flashlight and a spare phone charger. Next, he mapped out the quickest route to the police station. He traced the streets on a map, memorizing each turn and shortcut. It was a 15-minute walk, but with Lucas, it might take longer. He had to be prepared for anything. Michael spent the rest of the day observing Eric's routine. From his living room window, he watched as Eric came and went, noting the times and patterns. He saw Eric leave at precisely 7 p.m., always carrying the same duffel bag. It was his chance. As the evening approached, Michael felt a growing tension. He double-checked his supplies, ensuring everything was in place. His heart pounded as he waited for 7 p.m. The seconds ticked by, each one stretching into an eternity. Finally, he saw Eric leave the house, the duffel bag slung over his shoulder. Michael gave him a few minutes to be safely out of sight, then slipped out of his own house and moved toward Eric's. The cool night air was sharp against his skin, heightening his senses. He reached the back window, the one he had used before. It was still slightly ajar. Michael took a deep breath, steadying himself, then carefully pushed it open and climbed inside. The house was silent, save for the faint hum of the refrigerator. He made his way to the small room where he had seen Lucas. Michael softly called out, "Lucas, it's me, Michael. I'm here to help you." There was a moment of silence, then a rustle as Lucas emerged from the shadows. The boy's eyes were wide with fear, but also glimmered with a spark of hope. "Are you really going to get me out of here?" Lucas whispered. "Yes, but we have to be very quiet and very quick." "Can you do that?" Michael asked gently. Lucas nodded, his small hands trembling as he reached out to Michael. Michael took his hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "Stay close to me, and don't make a sound," Michael instructed. They moved slowly through the house, Michael's flashlight guiding the way. Each step was deliberate, every sound amplified in the stillness. They reached the back door, and Michael carefully opened it, glancing outside to ensure the coast was clear. "Okay, Lucas, we're going to go out the back and head straight to the police station. Stay right by my side," Michael whispered. Lucas clung to Michael, his small body pressed close. They slipped out the door and into the night. The streets were deserted, the town cloaked in an eerie silence. Michael's heart raced, but he kept his focus on the path ahead, guiding Lucas through alleys and side streets to avoid being seen. Michael held Lucas's hand firmly, the boy's small fingers gripping tightly in return. They navigated through the backyard and into the alley, their footsteps muffled by the soft ground. "Stay close to me, Lucas," Michael whispered, his eyes scanning the darkened street for any signs of movement. Lucas nodded, his face pale with fear but determined. As they walked, Michael could feel the boy's exhaustion. Lucas stumbled a few times, his legs weakening with each step. Without hesitation, Michael scooped him up, carrying him gently but securely. Lucas clung to him, burying his face in Michael's shoulder. "It's okay, Lucas. We're almost there. Just hang on a little longer," Michael murmured, his voice soothing. He felt a slight nod against his shoulder and tightened his grip, ensuring the boy felt safe and supported. The journey to the police station was fraught with tension. Every shadow seemed to hide a potential threat, every rustle of leaves a sign of pursuit. But Michael kept his focus, his determination driving them forward. He whispered words of comfort to Lucas, keeping the boy calm and reassured. "We're going to be safe soon. Just a little bit further," Michael said, his tone gentle but firm. Lucas's grip on him tightened, a silent acknowledgement of his trust. Finally, the police station came into view, its lights a beacon in the darkness. Michael quickened his pace, feeling the weight of the past hours lift slightly. He pushed open the station door, the warmth inside a stark contrast to the cold night. An officer behind the desk looked up, his expression shifting from surprise to concern as he took in Lucas's state. Michael set the boy down gently, keeping a protective arm around him. "I need to report a crime," Michael said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through him. "This is Lucas. He's been held captive by my neighbor, Eric. He needs help." The officer's eyes widened, and he quickly motioned for Michael and Lucas to sit. "Tell me everything," he said, his tone serious. Michael recounted the events of the past few days, describing Lucas's condition and Eric's behavior in detail. He spoke calmly but urgently, emphasizing the need for immediate action. As he spoke, he could see the officer's skepticism slowly giving way to concern. "Lucas, can you tell us what happened?" the officer asked gently, turning to the boy. Lucas looked up at Michael, who nodded encouragingly. "It's okay, Lucas. You can tell him," Michael said softly. Lucas took a deep breath and began to speak, his voice trembling but clear. He described how Eric had taken him, the fear he felt, and the marks on his wrists from being tied up. His account was simple but powerful, a stark contrast to the nightmare he had endured. The officer listened intently, his expression growing more serious with each word. When Lucas finished, the officer nodded, his face set with determination. "Thank you, Lucas. "You're very brave," the officer said. He turned to Michael. "We'll take it from here. We need to get Lucas checked out by a doctor, and then we'll go after Eric." Michael felt a wave of relief wash over him. "Thank you. Please, make sure Lucas gets the care he needs," he said. The officer nodded and called for a colleague to escort Lucas to a safe room where a medical team could examine him. Michael watched as Lucas walked away, his small frame looking even smaller under the harsh fluorescent lights. He felt a mix of pride and sorrow, knowing the boy had a long road ahead of him. "Mr. Michael, we'll need you to stay and give a full statement," the officer said. Michael nodded, ready to provide whatever was necessary to ensure Eric was brought to justice. As he sat in the quiet room, waiting for the formalities to begin, Michael reflected on the night's events. The fear, the determination, the small victories, all of it had led them here. Lucas was safe, and Eric would soon face the consequences of his actions. The officer returned with a notepad, ready to take Michael's statement. Michael began to speak, detailing everything he had seen and done. His words were measured, precise, each one a piece of the puzzle that would bring Eric to justice. The morning air was crisp as the police prepared to raid Eric's house. Michael stood nearby, his heart pounding with a mix of fear and anticipation. The officers moved with precision, their faces set with determination. The lead officer gave the signal, and they surged forward, breaching the door with practiced ease. Inside, the chaos unfolded swiftly. Eric's surprised shout echoed through the halls as he was overpowered and handcuffed. The officers moved methodically, searching every room. Michael watched from a distance, his breath held tight in his chest. From the basement, a cry of distress reached his ears. The police emerged, leading another child, Andrew, whose condition mirrored Lucas's. Michael's heart sank at the sight of the boy's gaunt frame and haunted eyes. Relief mingled with sorrow as he realized the extent of Eric's cruelty. The officers guided Eric, now subdued and defiant, to a waiting patrol car. Michael approached cautiously, his eyes meeting Eric's. There was a mixture of anger and pity in his gaze. Eric sneered, but Michael stood firm, unflinching. "You're done, Eric. You can't hurt them anymore," Michael said, his voice steady. Eric's sneer faltered, replaced by a fleeting look of defeat as the car door slammed shut. The raid's success spread quickly, drawing media attention. Reporters swarmed the street, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward. Michael found himself at the center of the whirlwind, his actions heralded as heroic. The plight of Lucas and Andrew was highlighted, their faces haunting reminders of the darkness they had endured. Michael spoke briefly to the press, his words measured. "This is about Lucas and Andrew. They are the true heroes, showing strength in the face of unimaginable fear. Our focus should be on their recovery." The media coverage brought a wave of public support. Donations and messages of encouragement poured in for the boys. Michael remained a steadfast presence, determined to see them through their journey to healing. At the hospital, Lucas and Andrew were given thorough medical examinations. The staff worked diligently, their professional demeanor hiding the emotional impact of the boys' conditions. Michael visited them daily, bringing books and games, small comforts in an unfamiliar world. "Hey, Lucas, I brought you another book," Michael said softly, placing a worn copy of a classic adventure story on the bed. Lucas's eyes brightened slightly, a shadow of his former fear still lingering. "Thanks, Michael." Andrew, still wary, watched from the adjacent bed. Michael approached him with the same gentle care, offering a small toy car. "For you, Andrew. I thought you might like it." Andrew hesitated before taking the car, his fingers brushing against Michael's hand. "Thank you," he whispered. The visits became a routine, a stabilizing force for the boys. Michael's presence was a beacon of safety in their tumultuous world. Slowly, trust began to build. Lucas started to open up, sharing snippets of his past, his dreams for the future. "Do you think we'll be okay, Michael?" Lucas asked one afternoon, his voice filled with uncertainty. Michael nodded, his gaze steady. "Yes, Lucas? It will take time, but you will be okay, both of you." Andrew, listening quietly, seemed to draw strength from Michael's words. His guarded demeanor softened over time, the walls he had built around himself slowly crumbling. The care center where Lucas and Andrew were placed was a welcoming environment, filled with professionals dedicated to their well-being. Michael's regular visits were a highlight for the boys, a reminder that they were not alone. One day, as Michael arrived with a new set of books, he found Lucas and Andrew engaged in a spirited game of chess. The sight brought a smile to his face, a testament to their resilience. "Who's winning?" Michael asked, setting the books down. Lucas grinned. "Andrew's really good. I think he's going to beat me this time." Andrew looked up, a shy smile playing on his lips. "Just a lucky move," he said. Michael joined them, the room filled with the warmth of their growing bond. The journey was far from over, but each day brought new hope. The boys were healing, their spirits mending with the support and care they received. As he left the care center that evening, Michael felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The courtroom was a stark contrast to the quiet streets Michael had walked so many times. The air was thick with anticipation, the walls lined with onlookers and media. Michael sat at the front, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. The trial of Eric had drawn significant attention, and today was the culmination of months of legal battles and emotional turmoil. Eric sat at the defendant's table, his face a mask of defiance, but Michael could see the cracks, the hints of desperation in his eyes. As the proceedings began, Michael's mind drifted back to the night he had rescued Lucas, the fear and determination that had driven him. "Mr. Michael, please take the stand." The prosecutor's voice broke through his thoughts. Michael rose, his steps measured as he approached the witness stand. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. "Please describe what you saw the night you rescued Lucas," the prosecutor prompted. Michael spoke clearly, recounting the events in detail. He described the state of the house, the fear in Lucas's eyes, the marks on his wrists. His voice remained steady, though the memories were painful. "What made you decide to act?" the prosecutor asked. Michael looked directly at Eric. "I couldn't stand by and do nothing. Lucas was suffering. He needed help, and I couldn't ignore that." As Michael finished his testimony, he glanced at Lucas and Andrew, sitting with their temporary guardians. Their presence gave him strength. They had come so far since that night. The children's testimonies were heart-wrenching. Lucas spoke of the fear, the loneliness, and the moments of hope when he heard Michael's voice. Andrew's account was similar, painting a picture of a life filled with terror until their rescue. The courtroom was silent, the gravity of their words hanging heavy in the air. The defense tried to downplay the severity, but the evidence was overwhelming. Michael's detailed account, coupled with the children's testimonies, left little room for doubt. The jury deliberated for what felt like an eternity. Michael's heart pounded with each passing minute. Finally, the foreman stood, delivering the verdict. Guilty on all counts. Eric was sentenced to 25 years in prison. The relief in the room was palpable. Tears streamed down Lucas's face as he clung to Michael. Andrew, too, looked to him for reassurance. Michael hugged them both, his heart swelling with a mix of sorrow and joy. Justice had been served, but the road to healing was just beginning. The adoption ceremony took place a few weeks later in a sunlit room filled with warmth and hope. Lucas and Andrew stood with their new family, a loving couple who had opened their hearts to the boys. The judge spoke kindly, his words formal but heartfelt. "Do you promise to love and care for these children as your own?" he asked. "We do," the couple responded in unison, their voices steady and filled with emotion. Lucas and Andrew smiled, a sense of belonging settling over them. Michael watched from the back of the room, his heart filled with pride and contentment. This was the new beginning they all deserved. The ceremony concluded with applause, and the room filled with laughter and tears. Michael approached Lucas and Andrew, kneeling to their level. "You both have come so far. I'm so proud of you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, Michael, for everything," Lucas replied, hugging him tightly. Andrew joined in, their embrace a symbol of the bond they had forged through adversity. Michael stood, his eyes moist, but his heart light. He watched as the boys left with their new family, a sense of peace settling over him. He had done what he set out to do, and now they had a chance at a brighter future. Returning to his home, Michael felt a warmth that had been absent for so long. The house, once a place of solitude, now held memories of courage and hope. He walked through the rooms, each one a testament to the journey they had undertaken together. In the following weeks, Michael visited Lucas and Andrew regularly. Their new home was filled with laughter and love, a stark contrast to the darkness they had endured. He brought them books and games, sharing in their joys and milestones. One sunny afternoon, as Michael watched Lucas and Andrew play in their backyard, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The boys' laughter was infectious, their happiness a reward for the risks he had taken. Years had passed since the day Michael had rescued Lucas and Andrew from Eric's house. The boys, once fragile and scarred by their experiences, had grown into strong, determined young men. They had channeled their past into a powerful motivation, dedicating their lives to advocating for children who had suffered as they once had. Today they stood as accomplished attorneys, specializing in child advocacy law. The grand hall of the city courthouse was abuzz with activity. It was the annual gala for the Child Advocacy Network, an organization that had grown substantially over the years. Lucas and Andrew were the keynote speakers, a testament to their journey from victims to champions of justice. Michael sat in the audience, his heart swelling with pride. His once solitary life had been transformed by the bond he shared with these two remarkable young men. He watched as Lucas and Andrew took the stage, their presence commanding respect and admiration. Lucas began, his voice steady and clear. "Good evening, everyone. Tonight, we gather to celebrate the progress we've made in advocating for the rights and protection of children. But for us, this is also a deeply personal moment." Andrew stepped forward, his eyes scanning the room. "Many of you know our story. We were once just statistics, two boys trapped in a nightmare with little hope of escape. But someone saw us. Someone cared enough to take action." Lucas continued, his gaze shifting to Michael. "That someone is Michael. He is the reason we stand here today, not as victims, but as advocates. His courage and compassion saved us, and we owe him our lives." The audience turned their attention to Michael, who felt a mix of humility and pride. He had never sought recognition for his actions, but seeing the impact he had on Lucas and Andrew's lives filled him with a profound sense of fulfillment. Andrew resumed, his voice filled with emotion. "Michael taught us the power of one person's actions. He showed us that bravery isn't the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. Because of him, we were given a chance to heal, to grow, and to make a difference. Lucas added, "We stand here today as attorneys dedicated to fighting for children's rights. Every case we take, every child we help, is a tribute to Michael's bravery. He showed us that we could turn our pain into purpose, and for that, we are eternally grateful." The room erupted in applause, the sound echoing through the grand hall. Michael felt tears welling up in his eyes. He had always believed in the power of kindness, but seeing Lucas and Andrew now, he realized just how far-reaching that power could be. After the applause died down, Lucas and Andrew invited Michael to join them on stage. He rose, his steps measured but steady, and embraced them both. The audience watched, moved by the poignant display of gratitude and love. Lucas handed Michael a plaque. "This is for you, Michael, a small token of our appreciation for everything you've done. You didn't just save us, you inspired us to save others." Michael took the plaque, his hands trembling slightly. He looked at the inscription, "In gratitude for your bravery and compassion, from Lucas and Andrew and all the children you've inspired." He cleared his throat, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, Lucas, Andrew. You've both become remarkable men, and I'm so proud of you. The work you're doing is changing lives, just as yours were changed." The evening continued with speeches and accolades. But for Michael, the highlight was the quiet moments he spent with Lucas and Andrew, reminiscing about the journey they had shared. They spoke of the challenges, the victories, and the future they envisioned, a world where every child felt safe and valued. Wow, what an incredible journey we've just shared. Lucas and Andrew's story is a powerful reminder of how one person's courage and compassion can truly change lives. From the darkness of their past to the bright future they now embrace as dedicated child advocates, their journey is nothing short of inspirational. If you found their story as moving as I did, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more content that highlights the resilience and strength of the human spirit. Drop a comment below to share your thoughts and let us know if there are other stories you'd like us to explore. Remember, every small act of kindness can make a big difference. Let's all strive to be a little more like Michael, brave, compassionate, and willing to stand up for what's right. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.